Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I'm your host, Nicola Denning-Millar, and today I'm joined by someone who is quite literally rethinking how we build the future. Nhung Nguyen is the CEO of Horizon Legacy, where she's leading innovation in housing through robotics-enabled construction, using automation and advanced technology to fundamentally change how homes are built in Canada. With over 17 years of experience across infrastructure, renewable energy and development, Nhung has led complex projects across the country. But what really sets her apart is how she's now applying that experience to push the construction industry forward. At Horizon Legacy, this includes one of Canada's first residential projects built using on-site robotics in Gananoque, a model aimed at building homes faster, more efficiently and more affordably. At a time when Canada needs to build millions of homes, Nhung is at the forefront of a new, innovation-driven approach to how we get there. Nhung, welcome. It's great to have you here with me today.
Hi, Nicola. How are you?
I am doing very, very well. Spring is in the air and things are about to get a whole lot happier.
For sure. Me too. I'm looking forward to it. It's been too long.
So we're going to kick off by talking about your career journey. And you started out as a computer engineer, and obviously now you are CEO at Horizon Legacy, and you're leading a company that's rethinking how homes are built. So can you start by sharing with us just what Horizon Legacy is all about?
Yeah, for sure. So Horizon Legacy has been based out of Toronto for the last 70 plus years, since 1952. The company's origination story was that it's a real estate development company, and that's what it's been doing for the past number of decades. When I joined their development division building renewable energy and infrastructure projects. But today, Horizon Legacy is sort of undergoing a rebirth, and now we are looking at ourselves and thinking of ourselves as a construction automation company. What that means is instead of just doing real estate, we are also developing and using robotic and new technologies to rethink how the built environment is executed and how we can improve and make construction better for workers, as well as, save costs and money and time is what all of us are really focused on doing.
And I obviously had the great pleasure of meeting yourself and Tony, sort of the middle of last year. Maybe you could share a little bit about Tony's vision and how this all came about.
So Tony is a very creative type of developer. He's in a class of his own, I think. And about 5 years ago, we were just finishing a project and he came to our senior executive team at the time, including myself and my colleague, Frank Bellerique. And he said, we've got a real problem in construction. We don't have all the people that's needed to build all the things that we need to build. Why don't we use robots in construction? And, when he said that at the time, it seemed to us a really crazy idea. Like, it's never been done before. It's crazy expensive. Construction is notoriously difficult to implement new technologies and things like that. But, he's the type of person that once he decides and commits to something that, we as an organization follow through. And so I sort of took his vision and rallied the organization and created what we are today, which is now a company that not only develops housing projects, but uses advanced on-site robotics to build housing. And our company is incredibly excited about what we're doing. And it's been a long and hard, couple of years, but we're finally seeing the realization of that vision. And now we're in a stage where moving past proof of concept into a scaling stage. And it's all thanks to, that initial innocent seeming question that he posed many years ago.
And I remember when I met him, he sort of commented, well, if it's not us, then who's it going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. He thought about this issue, and his family and real estate is in his blood, and it's in the family business. His father started this business, like I said, in 1952, and then the business passed down to his generation. And so the family had been doing real estate development for many, many decades. And I think having him speak and pose that question, it's from somebody who understands deeply the businesses, the challenges, the risks, what it takes. And, so like I said, he really made a commitment, very steadfast in the vision and the attempt for trying something new and completely different. We at Horizon think that without using advanced technologies, without, rethinking how we build construction, that we really can't solve some of the structural and entrenched issues that we're experiencing in construction. So it's really about him and his commitment and our company's commitment to this path that we're on.
I mean, it's really fascinating to me how you're blending technology and construction in a way that, really could fundamentally change the industry. And it's not an easy space to innovate in either. I mean, construction can be pretty traditional. It's a fairly conservative industry, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We are very clear-eyed about the challenges and what it takes. And I'm very pragmatic and clear-eyed about that as well. As I mentioned before, we went into this, current journey. I was part of the development group at Horizon who was developing renewable energy projects, which in those days were also very early and pioneering days. And I remember at the time when we were developing that, there was a lot of skepticism. There was a lot of, challenges. And yet over a 10, 15-year period, renewable energy development, the cost of it went from, being more expensive than traditional construction to being at cost parity and then later cheaper than conventional energy sources. So I have an understanding, hands-on of what it takes to lead and pioneer something new. What is really rewarding for me is, you assisted us recently with hiring a senior executive team member. And, the other day he said he's been exposed to it for about 2 months, I think. And then the other day he said, I'm really starting to like this robot stuff. Can I learn more? So we're attending a conference, with robot engineers so that our senior executive team can learn more and be exposed more to the other side that they normally don't get to see. And for me, that's really rewarding because it's about learning and educating one person at a time. And like I said, we're very pragmatic about taking this step. It's about a construction first approach, meaning that we have to build things that are successful and meaningful to construction. It's not that we're just, building things for the sake of technology, but those moments with people, their eyes being opened a little bit more is what's rewarding for us and for me.
In terms of your background, I mean, you've worked in renewable energy, infrastructure, and now, robotics-driven housing. So looking back, what sort of thread connects all of the things that you've chosen to build?
I like challenges. I'm compelled to do things that are difficult, and the more people say that it's easy, the more I'm like, okay, let's think about that and try it out. But the thing that connects all the things that I've done up to date are really about what can I do as an engineer to help have a social impact, to think about how engineering can solve some of society's problems. In the past, it was about the environment and how we consume energy. And then now it's about how we can use technology to build housing that's improving the working conditions of construction workers, building affordable housing and building housing that's faster and cheaper to help our industry. So that's what I see as my role.
Now, you obviously became CEO after years of leading development. So what changed in how you think, once you were responsible for, the entire vision of the company?
Yeah, that was it was a big change for sure. And it was actually quite surprising because, I'd been doing development for about 15, 17 years. And so I understood the business very well and all the mechanics of it. But the biggest change when I became CEO was the responsibility that I felt towards our people. And, it's a big weight on your shoulders to be responsible for the business aspects, to lead something new and technologically challenging as what we're doing, but also to lead people and lead through change. That is the biggest thing that surprised me about taking on this role.
Yeah, I mean, I can completely understand that. I mean, that's a big weight to carry, especially when you're not just running a business, but you're also leading something new and pushing boundaries in the industry. So that's totally fair enough. What would you say has been the most challenging part of being a CEO that perhaps you didn't anticipate before you started this journey?
I think that the most challenging aspect of being a CEO is, to me, about the people. That the technology, the implementation, the integration, all of those are things that it's actually for me quite easy. The people aspect, of a CEO is really about addressing skepticism, answering questions, overcoming fears and objections, especially when you're doing something new. And then also, like I said, being responsible for, your entire organization. And I think about that everybody has families and kids they have to look after, and I want to make sure that they feel like they're being taken care of, and that they feel that they're contributing positively at the organization. All those things are just multipliers of I'll call it the technical layer of the job. And for me as a woman, it's an emotional aspect as well. So I think about that regularly.
And in terms of, you talked about skepticism, and I can sort of understand that from an external perspective, but how do you handle that when it comes from people that you actually need on that journey with you?
What I've learned in construction is that seeing is believing. So instead of talking about the idea, talking about what will be done, we just talk about and show what we've done. So it's more about showing, not telling. And in the early days, in the first few years when we were talking about doing robotics, I think that the people in the room were just wanted to be a part of it, but just felt unsure about whether this was going to succeed or not. So they felt sort of maybe a healthy skepticism. And, we created a research and development lab. It's a first of its kind construction automation lab in Canada that brings together, the people in construction, the trades, as well as our engineers and our team. And we formed a group to test and validate assumptions and hypotheses. So it became a scientific exercise. Okay, we have this hypothesis. Let's check this and let's see if we're right or we're wrong. And so when you first give room for people to have questions, and then give room for people to be right or wrong, and then you go through that exercise lets people participate in the innovation process, and it lets them, express their doubts or fears or skepticism in the real physical environment. And I think that was, the opening point for when professionals, architects and engineers participate in, they can come and see and touch what we were building and testing. And they said, yeah, this I could see it. It actually works. And they touch it and it's sturdy and it becomes real. So it stops becoming an idea in a PowerPoint presentation. And it becomes real, and then people can touch it and they can see and believe it.
Amazing. And I'm still going to come to your factory. I can't wait to see it myself. I mean, from what you're saying, I mean, it sounds like so much of this really does come down to people. You're not just building the technology, but, you're building belief and alignment and building the right team around you. And having met your team, I mean, they really are a great bunch. You're really building something special. So most people don't associate robotics with construction. So what was the breakthrough insight that really convinced you that robotics could actually build housing at scale and revolutionize the construction industry?
Yes, this is a great question. And, I studied the history of robotics in construction. We are by no means the first company who has attempted this in the global history of construction robotics. And what struck me was that majority of attempts had been task-based robots, robots that do one narrow part of the job. But what's challenging about that is that, as we all know, construction and the process of building a building is very complex. There's hundreds of different tasks and trades that occur. And so when you think about robotics from a value perspective, if a robot has been designed just to do one narrow job or task, it doesn't bring as much value. And the consequence of deploying a robot on a job site is it could also potentially change the process of construction. And so that's been one of the crux issues, one of the obstacles or barriers. The second major obstacle that I found was that past attempts, I think, approached it from a technology perspective. So you'd get a bunch of really smart engineers or robotic masters or PhDs, and they would build a machine, but they didn't have the opportunity to sufficiently test and deploy it on a job site. So learning from those lessons, we kind of switched it around. So we said, first is, what can the robot do that would bring a significant value to the process, that's delivering enough value in the overall process that it could actually move the needle to, speed up time and reduce costs and labor savings. So that was one question. And the second question is, how do we organize the job site so that the effort of introducing something new is worth it? It makes it worth it for everyone else in the process, in the system. And so the current process that we're developing right now, the robotic technology builds a concrete shell of a building, so akin to typically what you would consider the superstructure, so the structural core of the building, as well as the building envelope, so essentially the skin of the building. And this robot technology and the process that we've developed, that process in a typical building is a big enough chunk of the building that it can actually move the needle in terms of value. And we also had to be willing to reorganize our process, the construction process, the sequencing of it. And those things kind of supported the enablement of this, this realization to be more successful than attempts in the past. So that's really what we did.
Are you looking for a specialized recruiting partner to connect you with the people who perform in commercial real estate? At Highview, we partner with some of Canada's leading real estate companies. From national landlords, institutional investors, REITs and service providers, to local developers, third parties, and private family businesses. We are passionate about the Canadian real estate industry and enjoy discussing what's happening in the market. We also provide insight and advice on hiring trends, compensation benchmarking, career roadmaps, networking opportunities, and much more. Visit us at highviewpartners.ca or contact us directly to discover how we can connect you to people who perform.
So when people hear about robots in construction, their first reaction is obviously, problems, they're going to replace workers and what's going to happen. So you've argued quite the opposite. So how do robots actually change the workforce instead of replacing it?
Yeah, so we're seeing that right now, and we're experiencing that right now. What we're seeing is two things. First is that we've been able to attract and hire workers that would typically not be attracted to a construction job. So one of the team members that recently joined us is he's an architect by training, and he signed up to be a robot operator. And when I spoke to him, I said, "Are you sure that you want to work on the job site? I mean, you spent many years as an architect." And he said, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he said, I don't want to do just the desk job. And I see this as part of the future, and I want to be a part of it. Other members of our team that operate the robot, they're also from engineering or technical backgrounds. One is a mechatronics engineer. Others are robot technicians that went to college to learn how to operate robots. And so what we're excited about is that it's kind of the reverse psychology, that the work raises the standard of work on site. The nature of the work raises the standard. And so we can attract a wider talent pool. And because it's skilled labor, we're taking away the manual labor part of the job. It's the dull, dirty, dangerous parts of the job, the 3Ds that robots help. And so then the robot operators are working on, supervision and project management and job scheduling and planning. They're not having to injure their back and, go through health and safety claims because of labor injuries and all those things. And we also think that this is exciting for young people who are used to, technology, growing up with technology. This is a joystick product that, that people can pick up, and someone can pick up, and within a 3 to 6 month training session, they could learn how to use it very quickly. So those are the parts that we find exciting about the nature of the work and how that's changing.
Have you ever taken a chance on someone because of that passion, even if they didn't sort of check the boxes, so to speak?
Absolutely. We think that hiring, and as I said, people is the most important thing, even though you think that on the surface, this is about technology. No, this is not just about technology. It's fundamentally about people, and our hiring practices and our view is that it doesn't matter if you have, a master's education or high school education. It's really about the attitude and the willingness to learn. All of us are, learning, and we're always learning and discovering something new every day. And it's a person who is passionate and curious about the mission, what we're trying to accomplish. And if you see and believe in that mission, then, it's the attitude that will bring the skill sets can be taught, but it's the attitude that comes first.
I love that. So let's talk about VAL. And VAL is the robotic arm that was used to build homes on your first residential project in Gananoque. So what does it actually do on site? Why did you call it VAL? And, what surprised you the most when you saw it working?
So what does VAL do on site? VAL is a robot that lays concrete without the traditional formwork. It's through a 3D printing process. Many of us, and especially kids, understand 3D printing. You can buy a 3D printing kit from Amazon for probably $200 or $300. There's a glue-like material that comes out. The texture looks like soft serve ice cream, except it's probably like charcoal ice cream because the color is darker. And, it lays out these beads of material, concrete, in layers. And then as it's laying it out, the material is setting very quickly, probably within a matter of seconds or minutes. And as you can step back and watch Val work, she's building the structure, of the building or parts of the building in the structure. Why did we name Val Val? We were inspired by HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So we like to joke that Val is a cousin of HAL, but sort of a nicer cousin, because for any of you that watch that movie, Hal becomes uncontrollable at the end. So Val is controlled. She's controlled by a joystick. So she's not AI by any means. She's designed as a hybrid process to be controlled by humans.
It's incredible to think about that actually happening on a live construction site, not just in theory. It sounds so futuristic. Do you envision a future with dozens of Val robots building housing across Canada? I mean, what's the long-term goal?
The long-term goal is to scale and make this a tool so that it's normalized like any other construction tool. I know at this stage it seems like it's novel and it's kind of maybe otherworldly, but our goal is actually to normalize use of technology on job sites so that it's no different than, say, a backhoe or a crane. It's another more sophisticated tool at the disposal of construction workers so that it can make their jobs better than what it is today.
Now, stepping back from the technology itself, I mean, all of this sits within, a much bigger challenge that we're facing, obviously the housing crisis. And in Canada, we need millions of new homes over the next decade. So do you think that construction technology is the missing piece in solving the housing crisis?
Absolutely. And I know that the feeling and the sentiment with, construction leaders and executives that I've spoken with is that they are very much interested and willing to try new things. So there is not resistance to innovation in construction. Actually, my experience has been the contrary. I do understand, though, that the industry is, very capital intensive, and any deviation is, high risk and has high impact to, bottom lines. And so it's a compelling reason for all of us, including, there's a government has a part to play, and the federal government, in fact, is playing their part in encouraging what the terminology is modern methods of construction. So there is a role that each of us has to play in modernizing construction, rethinking how we build it. It's not just about robotics. I know other companies are working on different areas and aspects, like even planning approvals as well. There's different technologies and approaches and building systems and processes being attempted. I think we have to continue on this discovery that we're undergoing right now in construction. It's necessary because we are all looking at ourselves and saying, how do we actually reduce cost? Because everybody has tried everything that they can think of up to date, and the only rock unturned is technology.
So you and your team have managed to build homes around 300k per unit using robotics. So what has to happen for that kind of cost efficiency to become an industry norm, Nyung?
So that was a really great achievement that our team, and it's kudos and thanks to my team that we did that, because typically new innovations, it typically costs more, as the audience is probably familiar with. And so the fact that we were able to do on the first build to meet this metric, which demonstrated that robotic technology can already meet cost parity with traditional construction, is quite exciting. And for us, that means that, there's a lot more room to grow and scale. So what we've been doing up to now for the last 5 years is a proof of concept, and we're currently at the stage of scaling. And scaling is really about growing predictably and reliably and consistently so that, we thinking about multiple robotic systems now, not just one. So Val was the single robot that built the first project. So we're thinking about, how do we organize for the job site to accommodate multiple robotic systems? How do we scale the teams? How do we organize the teams? What kind of skill sets are required for the teams? How does a traditional job site look differently now with multiple robotic systems? And how do we organize our processes and all those things? So if we get that right, and I'm confident that we will, then we expect a steady progression and expansion of our current activities.
I mean, what you've said there is, sort of incredibly compelling, really. I mean, especially at a time when affordability feels just so out of reach for so many people. I mean, I have children myself, and, I often find myself thinking about what buying a home is even going to look like for their generation. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's the most important thing. Is it's not just the technology, it's the why should we do this and why it matters. You talked about the future generation and your kids. So I think that's important for all of us to consider and think about. It's really, again, it's not about the technology. All technology is built for people and for people's benefit. And so it's, we're doing this for the future generation, for your kids, for future construction workers. That's what a lot of us who come to work every day think about. And that's what's challenging, but also exciting about what we're trying to do. And I hope that, we can encourage others to find their own ways to improve construction, because it's definitely a big beast, but at the same time, there's a lot of opportunities for improvements and innovation in construction.
So I want to shift gears a bit now and talk about what it actually takes to bring this kind of innovation to life. Obviously, developing construction robots requires major R&D and getting partners very comfortable doing something that is, totally new, not relatively new, but totally new. What were the hardest barriers to getting people to believe in this idea when you sort of took this to market?
The first thing was that I and Tony believed, and we were the first two people. And, as you go on this journey, we just, talked about what we envisioned, why this was important, how we envision it rolling out and being successful, what the challenges are. And what it really takes, as I said, really pragmatism. It's not that we're in love with our own idea. We go through a process of hypothesis validation, and it's incremental. Each step, it's like, okay, let's do this part of the process. Can Val build, a single column? Can Val build a wall system? Can Val build a structural load-bearing system? Can we get financing and insurance? Can we meet the building code, Ontario Building Code and National Building Code requirements? Can we validate this, that the parts that Val is building can integrate with the traditional parts of construction? Are there engineers that are willing to validate this process with us? And so it was one step at a time, one question at a time, and each question had a yes or no, and we had to do work and testing and validation to go through that. And then when you look back over a 5-year period, we have the data, we have the people that, were initially curious in our journey and wanted to be a part of it. And then now that they've had a chance to be a part of it, they can see from the inside, this actually works. And, so the crowd slowly grows, and that's been our experience in our journey. And now when we look around, there's a lot of serious, experienced, capable people in construction on our team. Our trade partners have seen that this works, and they can attest to it. And so we're encouraged to just continue.
So I'd love to move the conversation now to the community side of your work and the partnerships that you've built along the way. I know that you've led a robotic housing development with the Six Nations community. So what did that collaboration teach you about building technology that really respects culture and community priorities?
So my work, as I mentioned in the past, was in renewable energy development. And in fact, renewable energy development has a much more complex stakeholder engagement and community consultation process than what we're familiar with in housing development and construction. Because, for example, on one of the projects that I worked with in the past, it was a hydro project, and we had to go through pretty much about 10 years of stakeholder consultations. You can believe it or not. It's consultations and, environmental studies. So actually for me, 2 or 3 years in housing is quite short.
Are you a patient person?
You have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be. So what I learned from that experience is that, again, the development succeeds or fails because of the stakeholders that you have, your neighbors, the community, how you present the information, how you address concerns, as well as government regulators, municipally, provincially, federally, as well as all your partners that are working with you on the project, the lenders, the engineers, the architect, etc. So everybody has to be on board. And everybody has to know what the plan is, and it's a collaborative process. If somebody has, a question, it's valid. We have to go through and address that question. There are no band-aids. We have to kind of leave no rock unturned, so to speak. To the extent that you can be successful in bringing all the stakeholders together and, expressing the vision, and this is what we're trying to achieve, and then also most crucially, finding the right people that believe in the vision and that are willing to take it through all the way and are willing and able to do that. That's the key to the success of your innovation or what you're trying to do. So like I said, it comes down to people. It's not really about the technology. It's really about the people.
And what did that experience teach you about how development projects need to be approached differently when you're working closely with a community like Six Nations?
So when it comes to Indigenous communities, like the Six Nation, each community has its own context and politics and, rules. Each nation is a country in and of itself, actually, if you think of it that way. So they have their own governance structure, their own cultures and laws and rules. And it's helpful to have a local partner who knows and understands the rules of the game to help guide you in the development process. In our case, we have a partner. His name is Brian Porter. He's the principal architect of Two-Row Architect, which is a 100% owned Indigenous architecture firm from the Six Nations of the Grand River. And I follow his lead in terms of what's appropriate for the community and the context. And it's always helpful to have a partner that is from the community that can express their needs and context so that we can model the development appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really sounds like a process built on trust and, genuine collaboration, not something that you can just simply, rush through. So let's talk a little bit about the future. Obviously, we've talked about what you're building today, but I'd love to look ahead on what the future of this industry could become. So if you were to fast forward 25 years, what do you think a construction site will look like compared to what it looks like today?
So if I was to choose two words, it would be, more simple and more organized. There's a lot of things that happen on a job site today. There's a lot of the main challenges with on-site construction is, one of the main challenges is coordination, trade coordination, integration, and the whole process of, design development through to execution. So to me, it's about organization and simplification of the process. In our process, Val creates, like I said, the superstructure and portions of the envelope, the shell of the building, that consolidates several different steps in the process. So as we continue that, I'd love to have, multiple valves running around the job site, but that it's more predictable for the workers as well. So there's less, change orders, less rework, less quality issues that we have to address. And that at the same time, it should look like, not exactly like a manufacturing environment, but maybe a hybrid of it. And what I mean by that is that, it's more organized, it's cleaner, it's all those things that are important to be successful at the job.
So for any young engineers, builders or entrepreneurs listening in today, what skills do you think they should be learning now if they want to shape the future of housing, Nyung?
Good question. So study computer science, study computer engineering, electrical engineering, mechatronics, mechanical engineering. Those are the skills that, we're currently hiring or that we're adding to the team in addition to construction management, project management, civil engineering, structural engineering. The second thing that we really value in our workers are people that know and appreciate and like learning hands-on work. As I said, when I studied the history of robotics and attempts at it in construction, I found that there are a lot of, masters or PhDs, which are of course necessary, but the key to our success has been working with people who actually know and understand deeply construction, spent a lot of time on the job site, and can tell you very quickly, not from a theoretical, but from a practical level, whether something will work or not. So I would encourage future builders to spend a lot of time on the job site, trying things, doing things, either through hobby or with their parents or, whatever access they have, because that's kind of the last frontier of technology digitization. I think in the past several decades, broadly speaking, we've maximized and optimized all the software level, planning level layers of building. So whether it be architecture or engineering, layers have been optimized. We're using advanced software and processes now. So the last frontier is really the hard physical digitization, which is what we're attempting and pursuing right now.
From what you've just described, one of my kids, it's very much in line with his strengths and interests and sort of goals. So I even feel that I might have found him a job today. Today, we've covered a lot in today's episode, from technology to community to the future. So I want to end with a broader question for you. So if you could redesign one part of the housing system, whether it's policy or financing or construction technology or even public attitudes, what do you think you would fix first?
Right. So I'm going to answer this question in a different way. Based on, the last 5 years of my experience and talking with probably hundreds, if not thousands of people, what I've seen and heard firsthand is that people in construction, in real estate, in development, in working in the engineering or architecture, they want change and they want improvements. That willingness is there and that motivation is there. So the responsibility, it falls upon leaders to create the environment for them to be successful, because the creativity, the willingness, the desire is there for innovation. So it's really about policy that, if I could fix or pick one thing, it's really how to create policy systems and structures to support innovation so that people who are working in it and who know what the problems are and they have ideas of how to fix it can be successful in doing that.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Nyung, thank you so much. Well, not just for joining me today, but obviously for the work that you're doing and for sharing your perspective today. I mean, it's clear that this is a space that's evolving really, really fast, and it's going to be really exciting to see where it goes. So thank you very, very much for joining me. It's been my pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca. Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.